Hey, everybody. I hate to interrupt your lunch, but we wanted to bring up a couple people to talk about the video that you just saw. I know that a lot of y'all some of y'all had some great conversations you wanted to continue, and others were trying to listen to the video, but it's totally fine. We will send the video out. You'll get a link. You can watch it at your own pace with your headphones or on your big screen, however you want to consume it. It's a really fascinating documentary about affordable housing in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and so I'd like to welcome up the person who basically helped bring that vision together to say a few words, and then we have a really short panel before we break for our studio sessions. So without further ado, if Kimberly can come to the front. Kimberly Williams is our communications and design coordinator. Let's give her a round of applause. She came to me, she said, I lived in Minneapolis, and I think it's great we're having this event here, and I really wanted to tell a story about my experience with housing, and we made it happen, and as you can see, we had a lot of really great people in it. So I will let Kim come up here and tell her story. Welcome, Kim.
Well, hello there. Thanks, Briante. So, as you guys know, my name is Kimberly. I had a really long speech, but I'm going to cut this in literally half. So bear with me and we can get started with the panel. So we all have to live on this earth. We might as well enjoy living on it, right? And I think it begins with obtaining good housing, affordable housing. We spend about 90% of our lives indoors, and so optimizing quality of life for everyone through housing is definitely a long-term goal. As you witnessed during the video, my family, for me, is a perfect example and plays a huge role in my understanding of the importance empathy plays in urban development and good design. My background is in interior design and sustainability, so making sure things are functional but also look good and are up to par in terms of standards, having a basic quality look is really important in my opinion. So the individuals in the video, I'm nervous, y'all. Can y'all hear it? I don't do this often. But the people in the video, my sister Tanika Redmond, she has lived in Minneapolis for over 25 years. She really was the glue for this video and really helped me and supported me through this whole process. Jeremiah Ellison, he's the Ward 5 City Council member. He was the one, Thank you to him. Jamil Ford, he's an architect that owns his firm in North Minneapolis. Chelsea Dolan from Common Bond. We have a couple of Common Bond employees in the room. Thank you for being a part of the video. And so to end this, I hope that the video raised questions and changed perspectives in terms of building missions and businesses to not just focus on financial gain, but also good design for all. That's it.
Alrighty, so we're going to bring up the rest of the panel here. The first person I want to introduce is Annie McCabe, who's the Supportive Housing Regional Manager for Common Bond. Annie is with Common Bond, and she oversees the operation of the supportive housing communities by providing leadership and guidance to property managers and services staff. The goal of supportive housing communities is to support residents in maintaining housing and achieving independence. So welcome, Annie. I'd like to also welcome up Gretchen Nichols. She's a program officer with the Twin Cities Local Initiatives Support Coalition, or Twin Cities LISC, as you probably know it. Gretchen focuses on suburban and regional work, transit-oriented development, and manages the Corridor Development Initiative. CDI is a national award-winning interactive planning process that engages community members in guiding redevelopment along transit corridors and opportunity sites. Welcome, Gretchen. We also have the privilege of having Robert Lilligren here, President and CEO of the Native American Community Development Institute. Robert became President and CEO of the Native American Community Development Institute in May of 2016 after serving as the chair of the organization's board of directors since its founding in 2007. Robert is enrolled in the White Earth Ojibwe Nation. He served for 12 years as the vice president of the Minneapolis City Council, the first tribal member elected to public office in the city of Minneapolis. Welcome, Robert. We also have Jeff Horowitz, who is the Director of Policy and External Affairs for the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. Jeff manages policy, communications, and community engagement for the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority with a mission to provide quality, affordable homes for those in need in our community. Welcome, Jeff. And then I'd like to welcome up to the panel Kimberly and her sister Tanika. Both of them were in the video and have a wealth of knowledge to share as residents who have experienced affordable housing. Welcome, Tanika Redmond and Kimberly Williams. Okay, so I guess my first question to you all is, how do you define affordable housing? Do you all go with the traditional definition? Does your organization use a special definition? What does affordable housing mean to you and your work?
I'm going to jump in because I have the mic. I am with the LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and the housing industry has certain system surrounding it. And so the terminology affordable housing often refers to a certain income limitation or requirement that allows for certain public resources to be invested at various levels. So affordable housing, of course, it can mean many things. Typically, it means people should be paying about 30% of their income for the housing that they have. So it's really relative to your income levels and your ability to support all of the costs of your household. Housing should not dominate. It should be a portion of that. And how we calculate that is relevant to a lot of course, our full range of income spectrums. So everyone needs affordable housing. It's just a matter of how much we make to afford it.
Hi, I'm Annie, first-time panelist, long-time supporter of affordable housing. I believe for Common Bond communities, affordable housing is about home being the foundation for life, and that affordable housing is housing that allows you to be your best self, which includes being able to afford your bills. And I think in general, exactly what Gretchen said, that it's based on income, but it's something that's within your means so that you can achieve your other goals in life, so that you're not burdened down by just paying your housing costs and not being able to live a life. That's what I believe, and I think Common Bond would say thumbs up to that.
I think from the Housing Authority's perspective, we would echo the same definitions that have been used here, that sort of 30% of your income, that rule of thumb that most of us learn to think about in terms of, are you paying too much for housing? It's interesting that that filters right on through to the way federal subsidies are calculated. 30% of income is sort of the federal definition, if you were, that filters through multiple programs. I would just, to branch off from that, just say that the discussion about affordability leads very quickly into levels of affordability and levels of income and where our focus should be as a community. The term of art that's come into practice recently is the Housing Continuum, which, as you might expect, is everything from sort of emergency shelter and supportive housing, up through your middle class or upper class family with a mortgage. I mean, everybody needs a home, and that home should be affordable. Where on the housing continuum do we need to place our emphasis and our resources? From the Housing Authority's perspective, it's been very interesting to see in Minneapolis and to some extent at the state level that the shift has really moved to embrace a level of 30% of area median income. You have federal definitions of 80%, 50%, and 30% that are meaningful. The 30% of area median income standard is the large majority of the people served by the Housing Authority. So those families, those households are extremely important to us. The conversation is moving in that direction aspirationally. I think the question is, how do we mobilize resources to address that community in new ways, because it's drastically underserved at the moment.
language. Bonjour and Nindinaway Maganaduk. Greetings, all of my relatives. I'm Robert Lilligren, and I'm the CEO of the Native American Community Development Institute, or NACD. And my organization is not a housing provider, and I did inform them of that when I was invited to be on this panel. But I have experience in affordable housing through my 12 years on City Council. I'm a very small-scale landlord in a rapid redeveloping part of the city called Phillips, the Phillips area in Minneapolis. And my organization now is about capacity. We're an asset-based community development intermediary working in the Native community. And so we work with convening the community, often building capacity in the community for residents to participate in their own self-direction, to participate in their own planning, and then the planning of affordable housing. We have sort of a signature project called the American Indian Cultural Corridor, which is a vision of a Native creative placemaking corridor that includes housing, Native-owned businesses along East Franklin and South Minneapolis. The American Indian Cultural Corridor is a community-led idea, and it's made sort of feasible by the high level of home owners, or the high level of property ownership in the area along East Franklin. A lot of it's owned by an organization called American Indian Community Development Corporation, who is a housing provider and seeks to provide housing specific to Native people's needs and wants and desires. And so for the 12 years I was on City Council, I was kind of bound by all these different 30%, 40%, 50% definitions of affordable housing, sort of the different programmatic definitions. And now that I'm no longer bound by those, I think I can get a little more philosophical. And for me, affordable housing is housing that can sustain you, can sustain what you define as your family, and not cost so much of your wealth that you can't pursue what your interests, you can't pursue your hopes, you can't pursue your dreams. And one thing I am learning really rapidly through my involvement in responding to the Franklin Hiawatha encampment, and do folks know what I'm talking about when I say that? Yeah, is that the definition of housing and being well housed goes beyond, of course, being sheltered, but it's also a very individual definition. And I think one of the challenges we find working within a system is as we try to say it's 30%, it's 40%, it's this or it's that, that doesn't necessarily fit what an individual or a family or a household is really seeking. And so I think it's to sort of size the affordability of the housing to the individual needs.
It's kind of hard going last after this panel. But I'd have to agree with my neighbors here. Affordable housing to me, I think when you put a number on it, 30% is a great number to where you're still able to kind of accomplish some other goals outside of your life. But I think I'd probably change it around just a little bit, maybe add in a word, call it affordable adequate housing. I just think that affordable housing should be something that you and your family, that works for you. Kind of like you were saying, there's affordability in shelters, there's affordability in middle class, there's affordability in, luxury or higher class. And I just think that you should be able to reach any of those levels regardless of what your income standard is.
Good point. Cool. Okay. Well, I'm a little short, so, Okay, so you guys made really good points. Let's talk about different ways in which your companies are being innovative in housing today. So we're talking about affordable, but obviously it's not the best. So what are you guys doing to, prepare for the future of affordable housing?
You can wrap up again if you want, I suppose. So as far as the Housing Authority goes, just to give you a quick bit of context, and this probably will come as no surprise that public housing programs are not in an expansion mode, have not been for decades as far as the federal government is concerned. Public housing was created in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and arguably was never adequately funded, especially in terms of the needs that those buildings were going to have over the years in terms of upkeep, major renovations, and repairs. So the Public Housing Authority is focused fundamentally on preservation and how we can be innovative in an environment of scarcity of federal dollars, an environment that is not likely to change in the foreseeable future, even as we push at the federal level for everything that we can. How do we bring our local community together? How do we bring the city of Minneapolis? How do we bring the state of Minnesota's attention to preservation of public housing? And one of the challenges that we have is that preservation is not nearly as exciting as creation. Creation is important, and you'll hear other folks on the panel talk about that, and I think there's a lot of discussion about that elsewhere through the agenda today. But preservation is more cost-effective than creation, and if we lose the deeply affordable housing that we have, we're taking steps backward even as we're taking steps forward in creating housing in other places. So I could go into great detail on this, but want to keep things brief and just say that how do we leverage the federal programs and opportunities that are available to us, and how do we combine those with an increased interest and an increased investment, dollars and cents, at the state level and at the city level, recognizing that even though the federal government created these, they're assets that matter to all of us, and we will all in our local communities pay the price if we lose them as the years proceed.
So as a community development intermediary, we work with our partners in the community like the American Indian Community Development Corporation. We have a fairly new organization in our environment called BGWIN Financial. It's a community development loan fund concerned with financial literacy, entrepreneurialism, home ownership, and so to co-program and work with these other organizations around housing, home ownership. In response, again, to the homeless encampment along the Wall of Forgotten Natives, as it's often called, all of a sudden, as a community development intermediary, we now recognize the importance of having organizations that move through the community, engage with other partners, both within the Native community, public sector, and private sector, and we're rapidly exploring alternatives, and especially community-directed, community-designed alternatives. And just very recently, we were approached by a local foundation, Bush Foundation, and asked if we'd like to play this intermediary role in convening the residents of the camp and other stakeholders to design sustainable housing solutions for this population, especially at the intersection of homelessness and chemical dependency. And for those of you who work in the nonprofit sector, you're going to be amazed, because from the first phone call to me from Bush until the grant agreement was in my inbox, and they're funding, to a considerable level, $207,000. It was 10 days from first conversation to grant agreement. But this will put the community first. There's a strong emphasis on healing, and I think outside of sort of the status quo culture, you don't talk about healing and how it is related to housing, but in Native communities, other traumatized communities, this healing component is really important. So we'll start with culturally appropriate healing, ceremony, and really put the voices of the people who are seeking housing first and up front, and then those who represent resource holders will be engaged as well, because when we get to solutions, community-directed solutions, that's where the significant investment comes in, and we'll need those with resources to invest in them. And so I'm kind of holding back. I really want to hear what the community says, what they are seeking in housing. But one thing I'm sure we will learn is it's not just about rent and how much rent is, but it's about the kind of support that maybe very low wealth people need, people who have generational housing instability need to stay in housing, to rent an apartment. And so I'm looking forward to learning a lot through that and sharing that outward.
So we're in a housing crisis, and we at LISC and all of our partners need to lean in as much as possible in many different ways. We got to get out of the box, because we can't continue to do things the way we have. We'll never get to the solutions that we need. So LISC is working on 3 fronts in innovation. One is on developing resources, furthering resources for preservation and production, working to leverage other sectors, other industries to collaborate with us on housing. The health industry, for instance, is recognizing that the importance of housing is critical for people's health. So how do we encourage their investments? How do we work with other industries and sectors to say we all need to participate in housing strategies and solutions to make sure that we get an environment where everybody has a safe house? The second area of innovation, LISC is our aptitude on tax credit systems has been strong. We need to also lean in on community ownership models. We need to look at non-traditional housing options and really explore how to strengthen and invest in the methodologies to get to some non-traditional strategies. And third, investment in racial equity. And in that regard, we're putting supports toward emerging developers of color who are from the communities and best know how to serve the housing needs of their communities. These individuals are often challenged with equity and other kind of financial bearings to help them move into that space, so we're participating in helping them better position and have the technical supports to do that well. We're working with our community development partners and strengthening the ability to hire contractors of minority contractors and women so that we get more economic flow into the communities who have been left behind. And also how to strengthen and support more home ownership for households of color. How do we help support their entry into their greater housing stability for their futures?
That was a really good answer. I would say ditto.
Ditto.
For Common Bond, I think our biggest achievement that we're really proud of is NOAA, the naturally occurring affordable housing, making sure we preserve all of that. That's something that's very important to us and something we take a lot of pride in and make sure we're a partner in. I think we're also very good at bringing a lot of different players to a table to make something happen. It can't just be one or two people or investment or community developers. It really takes a whole group. For example, I oversee Upper Post Veterans Community. It's located on Fort Snelling. It primarily serves veterans who are formerly homeless. Within that one development, there's 4 different funders in order to provide subsidies for the units between VASH, HUD COC, Housing Support, formerly known as GRH, and Section 8 through Metro HRA. So again, trying to link in different resources to meet the needs of the community that we want to keep housed and help be housed.
And I'm just going to throw in one other very quick point, because I think, especially with Tanika, and you spoke your experience in Section 8, we've focused so much on the preservation of the physical public housing that we have, but it depends on how you measure, but really about half of what we do. And I think the other core piece of this is how do we work to make sure that people have choices and opportunity in where they live. Because in an environment when we're not adding vouchers, the only way that we can serve more people is by helping people to move through the program, to move to reach their goals and onto a better, more stable place. And so that's sort of the second front in which the Housing Authority is trying to innovate, in particular in working with other regional housing authorities to collaborate in ways that we have not before, to give people an opportunity for mobility.
I knew where I was going with this, huh? Took the words right out, but I kind of like what you guys said. I like the emphasis on the healing portion of the housing, because being, a recipient of some of the housing assistance and just being out here in the market, what I find is that everything, you guys get the help for us, but it's like a cookie cutter world where we have this housing and you have to be, this shape or size, or you have to fit this mold in order to get this housing. And then once you do that and you get it, you're just there. And it's like, here, we gave you the help. Now you go out there and figure it out. And that's kind of hard to do. I would prefer more so, like if the housing programs were more focused on, let's help this person, or she doesn't quite fit this mold. Some things have happened in her life. This is a great person. She has great goals, but at some point, she got turned around, or she needed help, or everything is more individualized. And if you focus more on helping that particular person get the affordable housing, live in the adequate affordable housing, then you're healing, and you're breaking generational homelessness issues and stuff like that. I feel like you reach a bigger percentage of people instead of, like you were saying, applying more vouchers or applying more housing. But if you can really get in depth with the particular housing that you're helping, I think it would go a lot further.
Well, that's a lot to digest. Okay. So, we're hitting going overboard on our times. There's a couple more questions. Let's talk Opportunity Zone. So there's this new program called Opportunity Zone, and it's creating a lot of buzz in the industry. For those of you that aren't really familiar with it, it's a federal community development program for America's low-income communities, and it's intended to encourage long-term committed investment, like attaining housing, retail development, and other jobs in distressed and low-income, concentrated poverty neighborhoods. And we would like to know, how is that impacting your companies, and how do you think it'll impact it in the coming years?
So like I mentioned, these types of financing tools are LISC's sweet spot. So we are in it to win it. We want to set the stage for how these resources can be utilized and impact positively the communities that they intend to serve. We know that's not going to be easy to guide that train because it's a pretty loose and nimble resource. There still isn't really the full knowledge of how it will work and what the rules will be that will shape it, but we are actively working to attract a conversation with both government, investors, and key players to put these projects together and utilize this tool. We need more creative ways to invest in important things that the communities need. So the problem with these investment tools is they extract profit for others outside of the community. So how do we try to mitigate that impulse to take as much out of the community as possible and try to figure out how to work with key players in the community to make sure that these investments directly benefit the community will ultimately, need and want and support it. So the jury's out so far. We don't really know what it's going to mean, but I hope you're rest assured that there are players who are really trying to make this an effective and useful tool for us.
And if you don't know, it's okay. You don't really have to have
You're a savior, Kimberly. I had to phone a friend on this one because this morning I was like, I'm not sure what this means because I'm not in the development sector of Common Bond. But I did talk to my cube mate, Andy, who is, and he said that same thing Gretchen said, that we know it's out there. We're still not sure what it all means, what it's all going to look like for us, but we're game to seeing what can work for us and how we can make this be beneficial to communities that we serve.
So I just want to build a little on what Gretchen was saying in that, from 2014 to 2016, I was interim CEO at Little Earth of United Tribes in South Minneapolis. Do folks know what I'm talking about when I say Little Earth? It's a unique project-based Section 8 HUD housing development that's allowed to grant Native preference in their renting, and so consequently maybe 98 or 99% of the residents there are Native. And I think this is a really good example of sort of the non-community considerations of these public funding mechanisms. And this is project-based Section 8. So what it is, as a place-making tool for the Native community, it was hugely successful. It's the heart of the Native community in South Minneapolis. The reason we can maintain such a dense residential base of Native people really creates a whole area, a whole quarter of Minneapolis that's identified as sort of the native part of the city. But as a transition for people into something else or into a better life, it hasn't been as successful. There's no fourth, or actually no fifth generation residents of Little Earth. And so it's sort of an example of Little Earth was created through activism, direct action of the Native community. And then once the bricks and mortar were built, then the support kind of stopped. And so just acknowledging that, listening to communities, and not just the housing needs, but the needs, the more holistic needs, like Tanika's talking about, that people or families require to move on to something better, I think is important.
I would agree that on the opportunity zones, it's early days yet, and something very worth learning about. We do know that the state has designated census tracts to correspond to those zones, and lo and behold, many of them overlap, at least as far as our interest goes, with areas where we have housing and where we serve a lot of families. I think and maybe LISC, I hope, can help us figure out exactly how we make this all work. But as I understand it, and again, we're all learning, but the fundamental underpinning concept with the opportunity zones is private investment for the public good, right? And it's similar in some ways to low-income housing tax credits, right? And there is that profit that may leave the community, may stay in the community, but that's the motivating factor, right? So it's private investment leveraged for the benefit of the community. So how does the community control that process? How do you make it work to your advantage and make it ultimately benefit the people it's intended to benefit? It cuts right to the heart of the debate about future public housing in Minneapolis, because this notion of public-private partnership, while this is something that's tested and explored and well proven in other cities, here in Minneapolis it's new. In the Twin Cities and in Minnesota, it's fairly new, and people have a lot of very reasonable questions about this inherently 100% public process, public good, and what happens when you begin to look at leveraging private investment to, in this case, preserve and arguably rescue that public good for the future. So that's a long community conversation. It's important to have, and the opportunity zones bring that right to the fore, because my understanding is that if we're to engage in that process, you are going down that road and having that conversation about, all right, how do we work with this program? How do we work with this private investment? But how do we keep it within the mission? How do we keep people not only from not being harmed, but how do we use it to advance people's lives? And if you can't do that, no deal.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that one to you guys. I appreciate all your hard work.
All right, so last question. Everyone doesn't have to answer if they don't want to. And then we're going to open up questions from the audience. 3 questions? Yeah. So just what else stood out to you in the video that you would like to comment on, or is there anything else that you think is important for us to know about affordable housing or in housing in general? Yeah.
So first of all, I thought the video was marvelous. And if you didn't have a chance to fully hear it while you were eating lunch, I hope everybody will go ahead and check it out. I would just call attention, I guess, to the title of this panel, I think, which is Equity Through Empathy. And it was a wonderful example of exactly what we need to do and what you have helped in a big way to do, which is to bring home to the rest of the community who, as far as we're concerned, maybe doesn't think about public housing or Section 8 on a regular basis, who these people are, right? Who is it? Who's affected? Whose lives are in the balance? And so every effort like that brings real voices, real stories, and that kind of authenticity to a bigger audience advances the goals that I think all of us have up here about getting the community engaged around these issues.
This wasn't going to be my answer, but one of the things that's going on in the Native community here is a deliberate and intentional attempt to indigenize or decolonize the way we do business together and to work in a more collaborative way with the concern for the whole community rather than for the individual. And we get asked to talk about this because we're having some success. And one of the key factors in our success is that the leadership, at least within the Native organizations, recognized the moment that we know each other, we like each other, we actually trust each other, and so we can move into this unknown environment. And it was really called to mind seeing Councilmember Ellison. And the city council we have here in Minneapolis right now is what I would call an equity council. And so how do we move equity measures forward while we have the opportunity? And so I guess what really struck me is recognizing the moment for systemic change.
So the video reminds us all of how intractable these issues have become, and yet we seem to be in another moment of awakening around new opportunities and the way we might reimagine our work in this space. I was reminded with the Sumner Olson Heritage Park example, because that was tough. You know, they had built public housing over a creek. So essentially the ground was shifting, the buildings were not, the structural damage to the buildings were significant, and the area was segregated away from other connections. So it wasn't necessarily a great example. It did provide housing. And so I was imagining, how could we use the eco-district for solving that scenario? How could we have brought all of the great ideas and wisdom in this room to make a better result for that community, for the people who live there? You know, what have we learned today that we can activate and operationalize around that can make some improvements to these situations? So it was another kind of helpful reminder of the challenge to all of us.
From the video, I think one word that comes to mind is inspiration from the stories that you were able to tell through that video, and what Tanika's experiences. Those systems that you're involved in are not easy. They're complicated. There's a lot of rules. There's a lot of regulations. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of accountability and sort of prove yourself that you're worthy of this type of housing. So that video inspired me to, being part of Common Bond communities, how can we do that differently at Common Bond, so that, and in particular with the population that I work with who are formerly homeless, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get into housing, and I think it inspires me to continue my battle in how to make that equitable, how to make it easier, and make housing be something that people are entitled to. It's not just a privilege, so thank you.
Well, again, I think I just have to reiterate building equity through empathy. Focus on the empathy part. I mean,
main point.
I could give examples, like Housing Choice has helped quite a bit of people in my community. You give out a lot of vouchers, but then, you know, everybody doesn't do what they're supposed to do with it. So it kind of gives the whole program a bad name, and then from there, you know, landlords don't want to rent to you, and it's a lot. But if you put a little bit more empathy into it, or like you were saying, there's a lot of hoops, there's a lot of, if we could just really take a look at what hoops we're asking people to jump through, how, you know, there's a lot of people that you can weed it out a little bit better about who we're actually helping and who wouldn't, I guess, be helped with the program, and then that, again, is with the sustainability, and so I guess that's how you would build your equity there.
All right, so we're going to do maybe about 2 audience questions. We gotta get to the studio session. So if you have like a burning desire to ask a question, we want you. I don't even see any. Do you guys do you have any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Richard Aviles again. I'm really interested in the work that I'm calling the displacement to homelessness pipeline. In California, we have the Housing First model, and I think it's always a Band-Aid solution to, like we were talking about, to housing and homelessness. One, do you think that what is the type of healing that's being done between the relationship of landlords and tenants? I think Tanika mentioned to that, where landlords don't want to rent to certain people. What is the capital that renters have at the moment? And if we're looking at market solutions in California, we have the cap and trade program that's been able to reduce CO2 emissions in the state. Do you think that a similar program as a cap and trade program of displacement would be something that developers would buy into?
That was great.
So I'll say a few words and then pass the mic along. The notion of cap and trade with regard to displacement or eviction is something we'll have to take back and think about. That's not I guess a metaphor or an application that So maybe chat afterward and learn how that might work. You heard in the video about the Renters Bill of Rights. I'm not sure what the current term is, but I think that is an important idea and an important conversation for the city to have. And I think we, the Housing Authority, we house people who have been through many other housing scenarios and function sort of as that safety net, right? And so the people that we work with every day, the families and the households, have been through that process, and we hear those stories and understand how difficult it is. So that's one thing that's happening here locally that I think is very interesting and has a lot of potential. It's worth mentioning the experience in Minneapolis. Over the past year, I think it was in the spring of 2017, the city council prohibited discrimination in housing against people who had Section 8 vouchers. So that went into effect roughly a year later, and it was in effect from, I think, May of this year until maybe late May or early June, when it was struck down by a court as being unconstitutional. And that was a big disappointment to, I think, the unanimous city council, who at the time voted in favor of this, to many advocates who thought that not only was this a practical way to give people an ability to live more places, but it's just wrong. And it sort of cuts against our sense of what's right to have no Section 8 stamped across the bottom of an apartment listing. So that was it was a wonderful effort, a wonderful attempt, and actually that whole episode gave us an opportunity to talk with the community about the Housing Choice Voucher Section 8 program and to help people understand, to get past some of those stereotypes. So it turned out, I think, to be a positive moment for the program overall. A setback legally, but I think there's been some conversation at the state level about how we might move forward, but continuing to work in whatever ways we can to break down barriers to people finding and using a Section 8 housing voucher is a piece of solving that question.
This morning, Sean Pierce had a compelling set of comments that kind of revolved around how our country was founded on stolen land. Our country is truly responding predominantly to property rights and the way in which we control our environments through property ownership. So tenants, I think, in our community have been really inspiring in how they've begun to organize and activate their capacity to push back on some of those conditions and work together to build leadership and create a voice so that others understand how their housing experience works and what's needing to be improved. But I think it's an uphill battle because so many of our laws are geared to protect the rights of property owners. So I feel like the cap and trade concept is interesting. We should definitely learn from other places and understand what other options we might be considering. So thank you for your comment.
All right, one more question and we'll...
Yes. I heard Robert talk about systems change and about how you're seeking new solutions. You folks talk about tenants' rights and vouchers and discrimination as far as with renters. What are you folks doing, or what do you see that we should do related to keeping homeowners within their homes, those who are low income, those who are seniors, and others, when the system is creating policies to get them out and make them homeless, and then create that system where they need support and all kinds of other things when it's much cheaper to keep them in their homes?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. And this idea was something that I really focused on during my time in City Hall, and there wasn't a lot of interest or traction in doing what you're talking about, keeping people in their homes, letting them extend their terms of their homes, and keeping their homes in safe, clean, and good repair, I guess adequate, as Tanika would say. And I think there's more interest now. And so I live I actually just moved, in the Phillips area, and there's a very an aging housing stock, aging population as well. And pretty much every block has that house that has an elder living in it that isn't being maintained, that isn't really even safe. And so from the council perspective, I often intervened and mediated between the system and and the homeowner and resident to try to keep that person in their house, keep the house up to code, find the resources that are available. And I think a big part of a solution is helping the homeowner navigate the system, the regulatory system, the system that would keep their house in good repair, keep it safe. It's a complicated system, and it's one that I think a lot of people, not just elders, feel like they are not in control of their destinies. They're not able to easily understand what their requirements are, especially in historically traumatized communities. People respond very differently to authority. So if an authority comes in and says something about your house, it's a threat. It's a threat to you. And so how do we help people navigate? And I think that piece about navigation is an important response to what you're talking about, what you're asking about. But in a lot of this, housing issues where people who don't always engage with a large system need to engage with it to be well housed, safely housed. I think that navigation piece, the human piece, I guess the empathetic piece, is really what we need to be investing in.
All right. Thank you guys. You guys did a great job. We can give them a round of applause.